We're about to go. I'm gonna. Okay, I'm gonna interview you. Oh, stop eating popcorn.
We're not ready for it yet, are we?
You're live.
Stay on the air, okay? Hi, this is New Mexico Indie Media. Diana, stay on the air because I want to interview you. Okay, you want to plug him in?
Sure.
Plug her in. Our show tonight is, on my left is Roger Finzel, and we're going to be talking about, this is a show to honor Russell Means, who just died at the age of 72, just before his birthday. Anyway, we're going to be talking about Russell, we're going to be talking about American Indian Movement, AIM, and we're going to be talking about Wounded Knee. So that's the format for the show, and it's very informal. And is Diane still there?
Yeah, I think so. Diane, are you there? You there? Diane? Speaker off, speaker on. I can't hear her. I don't know. It won't fit.
Well, I'm going to make a couple of announcements, and I'll call her back. But she was also at Wounded Knee, and she's a sister from that struggle up there. Anyway, my name is Alan Cooper, and you're listening to, you're watching Indie Media. nmindiemediashow.org is how you get to us. You can and you can also get us through Vimeo.com, and also through quote-unquote.org. But we urge you to use nmindiemediashow.org because that's our show.
So we should start and find Diane in a moment here.
Yeah, I'm going to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I want to thank Simon Polakowski and Sue Skirman for the great work they did last Saturday, organizing equipment and getting everything, getting things more organized and together, because we're about to go. Well, I know you've heard this before, but we're about to go to 24/7 live
broadcasting.
Web streaming. Is what
Web streaming.
Web streaming. I'm trying to learn the language, Roger and I are both trying to learn the language. So anyway, I got a couple of announcements, and I'm going to try and get a hold of Diana Bird, who was eating popcorn when I called, and I said, stop eating popcorn. Okay, the first announcement is one that I've done over and over again, and we'll continue to do it, and that is to ask you to call the city of Albuquerque and just call 311 and tell them you want to talk to the homicide division at APD, Albuquerque Police Department, and you would like to see something happen in behalf of our sisters, mothers, aunts, grandmothers, girlfriends, the ones that died. They found 11 bodies, the largest. It's an ongoing, active investigation with 9 homicide detectives, and nothing has happened. It's been going on for over 10 years, and I don't know how to put it any other way except that I'm disgusted. That if that was one white man, they'd still be out there looking. But because they're poor and non-white people, all of them, they were either Native people, African American people, or Latina people. They were all non-white, working class women. And so if you want to help in that investigation, the only thing I know of at this point. By the way, I should mention that there's a tip line, and if your tip ends in the arrest and conviction of the perps that were involved in this mass murder on the west side here of Albuquerque, you'll collect $100,000. So that's the American way of justice, right? You put a price tag on
bribery.
Wonderful. Anyway, so call 311 if you know anything, or if you want them to do something. Or call the FBI, the Albuquerque office of the FBI. I don't have it in front of me, but it's pretty easy to find. And like I said, call the APD. It's real simple. Just dial 311 and tell them you want them to get their ass in gear and figure out who are the perpetrators of this mass murder. We're the only one that's covering it. And if we weren't covering it, it wouldn't be covered. But I want you all. That's a basic thing that you can do. Okay, another announcement. The Autonomous Playhouse. Check this out. Presents the Homeless Apocalypse Tour. I love that. The Homeless Apocalypse Tour, man. You can't be more direct than that. It's a puppet show. It's on foreclosures. It's on homelessness. And it's on GMO foods. And it's tomorrow. Friday. Yeah, Friday. Tomorrow, October the 26th at 4 p.m. at the Peace Center. That's at 202 Harvard Southeast. Or you can call Sue at 268-957 during regular working hours for more information. But that's tomorrow, the Homeless Apocalypse Tour. It's going all over the country. It's affiliated with Food Not Bombs, which is a radical Catholic political
Give that phone number
organization.
again, Alan.
268-9557.
Okay.
And the Autonomous Playhouse presenting the Homeless Apocalypse Tour. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Roger for a minute. And we got plenty more announcements, but that's all we're going to do tonight. I know that's pretty staggering to believe that. But tonight our topic is, the show is in honor of the American Indian movement and the struggle by Native people for justice as an occupied people in what we call now North America. So I'm sorry, I'm a little stuttery. Roger, my dear friend on my left here, Roger knew Russell Means, as did I, only I feel like you knew Russell better than I did. You spent more, quality time, if you will.
Russell died on Monday from cancer at the age of 72, and I have discovered as I get older that there are other people out there who do not remember Wounded Knee in 1973. And I think it's important that we talk a little bit about what was going on, because during the 60s there were civil rights struggles involving black people, involving Chicano people, and this was part of the civil rights struggle of Native American peoples. It sort of came to a head at what's been known as the Siege of Wounded Knee in 1973, when an organization called the Oglala Sioux Civil Rights Organization was a civil rights organization, just as the other organizations were civil rights. After having been oppressed by the tribal chairman, Dickie Wilson, and after having been denied any kind of due process or equal protection in its attempt to try and get rid of Dickie Wilson, that is, he presided over his own impeachment. Kind of an interesting way of doing things, typical of dictators. In any event, the elders who were involved with the Oglala Sioux Civil Rights Organization asked the American Indian movement to come and assist them in bringing attention to the problems they had. And they had a meeting at a little, I don't know how they got all the people in this little one-room building, and they decided to go to Wounded Knee and to make a stand there. And so they left and went to Wounded Knee and literally took over the village. And the village consisted of a trading post and a cemetery where the several hundred Lakota Sioux had been massacred in 1890 by the remnants, or the then 7th Cavalry. And so it was a symbolic act that they took, and they, in occupying the site of Wounded Knee, it was the local people that wanted to do it. It was the Oglala Sioux Civil Rights Organization, and through a course of several days, they came to establish the independent Oglala Nation, which I'll get to in a minute. But Alan comes in at that point. Alan was down here in New Mexico and heard what was going on, and he and several other people jumped in the VW, wasn't it?
We had 2 cars.
Yeah, 2 cars. They came in 2 cars. He went up to provide whatever assistance he could, and when Alan got there, here was this guy from New Mexico nobody knew. When Alan got there, they said, okay, you want to help out, we're going to put you on guard duty on this perimeter, on this roadblock. And no, he wasn't there an hour, and 2 postal inspectors decided they had to check out the post office at Wounded Knee.
That was more than 2. It was 4.
4 hours?
Yeah.
4 hours.
Four so-called postal inspectors.
Four postal
But
inspectors.
they all had 38s and 357s and 500 rounds of ammunition each. But they were postal
Well,
inspectors.
the fact, what happened was Allen stopped them, as he was told to do, and there were other people there, and he asked people who were in charge, seemingly in charge, what should I do? And he was told to arrest them. So he arrested them. Now, from that, Alan Cooper got more charges than either Russell Means or Dennis Banks. Russell Means and Dennis Banks eventually went to trial after 71 days of the siege at Wounded Knee, and that's a whole topic by itself that we don't want to spend all this time on, because the critical fact was that Russell Means and Dennis Banks and everyone else involved tried to bring attention, and did bring attention, to the fact that this was really the reality, first of all, of Native people, that they still were here. They existed, they were alive, and on top of that, they had injustices, which we had heard about, but we thought were in the past, and that they wanted and were entitled to, as a matter of right and as a matter of law, to their own independent nations. Ironically, after World War II, we decided, along with all the other civilized nations of the world, to end colonialism.
So-called.
And so we allowed for, in one way or another, whether they struggled for it or not, or if they had to, as in the French wouldn't give up their colonies, so the people had to take it from the French in Indochina and in Algeria. And throughout Africa, we insisted on the freedom of colonized people without ever recognizing that Native peoples in this country are colonized people. It is a simple fact of history and of law that there is, with one little exception of a few acres in Minnesota, none of this country was seized by the United States or anyone else by the right of conquest. The United States government to this day does not recognize any taking of Indian land by right of conquest. All of the land was given by Indian nations to the United States in return for certain things that the United States was supposed to do. They were called treaties, 72 treaties, all of which have been broken.
Yep.
So that puts us in the context of where Russell Means was. Russell Means was a product of the times, of the age, and he had realized his heritage through a long process, and he got involved with the American Indian Movement, which was founded in Minneapolis. In 1969, and Russell
got involved a year later.
was a dynamic person.
Yep.
He was a wonderful spokesperson. He was, in later life, he became an actor because he was so much the image of the strong person. And I was thinking about that on my way here tonight, that Russell was such an articulate spokesperson. He had such a wonderful way with words because he felt everything that he was saying inside his soul. If you look at pictures of Russell's ancestors, yeah, there are, for example, if you look at a picture of Gaul, I mean, it's a spitting image of Russell. Mm-hmm. So he's often been compared to some of the great Indian warriors of the past. And, you know, he was more than a warrior. He was an advocate for the independent nations, the independent Indian nations. And I think that through all of the New York Times reports and all the other reports, the obituaries that have been talked about in his life, I think the important thing to me is that Russell Means died, but the effort, the activity, the idea that he espoused of independent Indian nations not only lives but flourishes in this country in spite of government attempts to divest it. And there have been delegations of all kinds of Native people who have gone to Geneva. The International Indian Treaty Council is a non-governmental organization before the United Nations. They presented testimony. They've demanded that the United States honor its treaties. And I think Russell said, I'm not going to ask you to honor the treaties anymore because you won't honor the treaties. He said, I'm declaring our independence. We are independent nations, and he set up an independent nation after Wounded Knee in South Dakota. And I think that this independent activity, this thought of independence, this right of colonized people to have their own destiny, to be their own nation, is an idea that will flourish and grow beyond Russell Means' life. It's what he stood for, and I think that's the most important thing that I can say in memory of Russell. I mean, I knew Russell from 1973 when I first met him until he died. I saw him many, many times. We interacted many, many times. We disagreed sometimes, strongly sometimes.
Yeah, we disagreed a lot too.
But that is all irrelevant. The fact is that he was an outstanding, a unique human being. And, you know, I was looking through archives of things that Russell said. And one of the things I really like the most is he one time said, I think recently, that if all the winged creatures of the world were to die, we could not survive. If all the four-legged creatures of the earth died, we could not survive. If all the green creatures, the plants of the earth died, we could not survive. But if the two-leggeds of the earth died, the earth would flourish.
It would thrive.
It would thrive.
Yeah.
That's it. It would thrive. And the fact is that we have his heritage, his example, to guide us, ourselves and future generations, in terms of the kinds of struggles that we should be engaged in, however we do them.
I want to back up for just a second.
Sure, Alan. That was my little.
No, little. That was big, and that was good. It was good. It was very good. No, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. The massacre in 1890. In that massacre, most of the victims were children and old people, and
And women.
Yeah, and women, and we're really good at killing women and children and old people. Somewhere around over 300 people died, and some of them were small children, and there were a couple of children who ran into the brush at Wounded Knee Creek and didn't get bayoneted in the back by the heroic 7th Cavalry. But I want to point out, and people continually tell me that they've never heard of it before, but 23 Congressional Medals of Honor were given to the troops who murdered those people in 1890 in December. 23. Now, anybody who's a veteran, you know that's an astronomical number for a war. Forget about it being it wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. And that is kind of an example or a metaphor for what's happened to Native people. And I want to point something else out, and Russ pointed this out much more eloquently than I. He said that, you know, they always posit us as being aggressive. And it's like going to Iraq and bombing Iraq back to the Stone Age and accusing of being violent. Excuse me? I personally believe that people have the right to defend themselves. It's empowering. In fact, even Mahatma Gandhi said he would rather people resist with violence than to do nothing. And I believe that firmly. And Russell and I had an adversarial relationship. It wasn't always adversarial, but we had a lot of had arguments over a number of issues over time. But I wanted to do the show tonight to honor him because he deserves that honor. He gave his life to Native people, and it's I don't know what else to say. That he.
Well, Alan, in terms of your being at Wounded Knee, you were there 65, 66 days?
No, it was 59 days.
59 days out of the 71 days, and actually Russell wasn't there as much as you were.
I know,
because Russell went off to negotiate in Washington and was arrested.
I know.
Typical government, plot. Come and talk to us, and so we'll put you in jail.
He had to have fresh mint tea.
Well, you're not going into that now.
I'm joking.
Did you tell about the babies being bayoneted and Wounded Knee?
Oh no, that was in Sand Creek. The Sand Creek. No, the Sand Creek massacre, which happened in when was it? It's the turn of the century. I'm sorry, I can't remember the dates right now. But in southeastern Colorado, I've forgotten a lot of the
But what I think more importantly than the massacre at Sand Creek that someone can look up is the fact that in the 50s and in the 60s, you had this resurgence of Native American understanding of those things. And more importantly, you had in the 50s this effort to take Native people and relocate them to the cities, to civilize them, even in this century.
No, it was to take the land away.
Well, it was to take the land away, but it was also
they did a
to
really good
integrate
job.
them into the country. And all of those people who went off, came back, many of them came back to the reservations to find their roots. And a lot of those people went to the cities and had trouble and ended up in jail and ended up in prison. You take the leaders of the American Indian movement. Dennis Banks had been in jail. Vernon Bellecourt had been in jail. Russell Means had been a heroin addict in California, didn't get caught, so he wasn't in jail. You just go through the whole litany, and from the oppression that was imposed upon them by this forced relocation, the same kind of relocation we did in Vietnam by taking people and putting them in strategic hamlets, taking them away from their land, their culture, their people. This went on. This is something that has gone on then and continues to go on. Yep. And after Wounded Knee, the U.S. government engaged in a policy of deliberately sterilizing Native American women. 1/3 of all Native American women from 1973 to 1980 were sterilized in this country in an effort to try and destroy the efforts of Native people to have their country back. This is not ancient history. This is right now. This is what Russell Means fought against. This is what he stood for. And this is the legacy of forming an independent nation. There is no point for Indian nations to try and integrate into the United States. It's as much point as asking the Vietnamese to integrate into France. They said no. They resisted. They have their own country. Same thing for Native people here. What we have to learn and what we have to understand is that within the borders of this country, we need to accept the fact that there are independent nations. Now, as a matter of law, Indian nations today have a great deal of what we call sovereignty. But I'm here to tell you that before 1973, nobody in this country talked about Indian sovereignty. It was unheard of, and nobody understood it, least of all Indian people. And Russell Means was critical in bringing that up.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things I think is really important to note is that a lot of historical coup-type battle enemies came to Wounded Knee. There were over 60 different tribes represented, including all, as far as I know, all the native people in New Mexico. And,
were represented there. And a lot of the Pueblos weren't allowed to go there, so we can't.
They went anyway.
They went anyway.
Oh yeah.
And,
in fact, I was trying to get. I'm not going to mention her last name, but a Pueblo woman who was at Wounded Knee, one of several that I knew, was. I've tried to get her to come on the show now. She's kind of shy, but I wish she'd come on because she's dynamite. Anyway, so tonight, Indie Media, New Mexico, nmindymediashow.org. That's our website. And we'll soon, I can't tell you when, but we'll soon be web streaming live 24/7. And we're struggling, the city threw us off the air. And I got to tell all my brothers and sisters here tonight that, in case you hadn't thought of it, I think that the reason why I got kicked off the air is a kind of a badge of courage. That we resisted, we stayed on the air for 33 years, and we got to the point where we were exposing too much of the truth. That's when they started engaging in this whole process, illegal process, to throw us off the air. But we have a class action lawsuit that's coming that's going to be headed by one of our senior legal expert who's sitting on my right. If you want to pan over to him and say hello.
Hi, Marvin.
Thank you for coming, Patty. Thank you. Anyway, I want to recognize everybody here: Patty and Marvin Gladstone, Steve Mills, Mike Swick, Bob Ailey.
Jean Thomas.
What?
Jean Thomas.
Jean.
Sue.
Rose Buffalo. And everybody knows her. If you don't know her, you haven't been listening or watching. In fact,
You forgot Sue Sherman?
Huh? Oh, where is she? Oh, Sue? Oh, yeah, she's here too. In fact, Sue, as I said earlier, Sue and and Simon did an incredible job last Saturday, single-handedly. There were just two of them, and they
Mike helped.
Mike helped. Almost single-handedly reorganized all of our stuff. I started to call it junk, but it's not really junk. It's a lot of stuff. Anyway, so our show tonight is this is nmindiemediashow.org. You can also get us through quote-unquote.org. You can get us on Vimeo. I went to Vimeo this afternoon and saw the Dave. Yeah, really good, clear, good. Really, we get really good people on, like Roger Finzel.
Announced that we won that award, Best Live Show.
Oh, why don't you?
No, go ahead.
Just sounds too self-serving. There was a WAVE award. I forget what the acronym stands, but it's a public access television show on the west organization on the west coast that we competed in with a documentary show that was produced by the crew that are right here now. Most of whom are here now. There are a few who weren't, and it won. It won a national.
The show was a tribute to Alan Cooper.
It was
Just that's why he's hesitant to say anything, and it was a righteous
crew
tribute.
that most of them are here now, and I'm looking at them, and you are the ones that produced the show, and I applaud you for that. You really did a great job. So anyway, we're going to stay on the air, and if it gets down to it, we'll operate out of a van. We did this in 67, 68. We set up a clandestine radio, and drove around the Bay Area, and kept news going. We had a certain channel that we were on, and we'll do that if we have to. If we have to fall back to the old analog version, leafleting or whatever, we're not going to stop. The people here are committed, are obviously not, rich and famous, but
Infamous.
huh? No, the infamy. No, I'm serious. The infamy, and I think Russell and I would agree with this. The infamy is what 500 years of American invasion of the Western Hemisphere has done to the land and the people. A couple of English researchers came up with the idea that somewhere around 50 million, that's 50 million, native people died in that process. So it's no small thing.
It's no small thing, and I
It's
think
huge.
that since we're talking about Russell Means, he did write an autobiography, Where White Men Fear to Tread.
I love that
And
title.
if you look on
Say
it,
it again. Say it
Where
again.
White Men Fear to Tread.
That's okay.
And
Emphasize.
and you can probably find it on Amazon really, really cheap now, because it was published some years ago. But it is a marvelous read. Even if you knew nothing about Native people, it's a marvelous read about.
And Russell talked about him in the book.
Well, he talked about you too, Ellen.
No, he talked about you in the book.
Well, that's neither here nor there. The fact is that the struggle that Russell went through is a struggle that so many Indian people have gone through and that we're so ignorant of. And we've been educated. I'm forever grateful for the education I received when I went to South Dakota in 1973 and stayed there for so long. The education is so important because we have been so ignorant and denied this history. When I lived in South Dakota after Wounded Knee, I came to discover that the people of South Dakota were not taught the history of South Dakota in their public schools. They knew nothing about it. People in Sioux Falls knew nothing about it.
They're not
Good-
taught about
Good.
anything.
There were good people in every part of South Dakota that came to the assistance of Indian people in the Wounded Knee Legal Defense Committee, but the schools were not teaching them anything. It reminds me today that so much of our education has been destroyed in the last 20 years, 30 years, so that now we have a nation of uninformed people who are easily manipulated. And it's the same thing that happened to Indian people, only now they're doing it to the rest of us. So there's a lesson here for all of us. in terms of what was going on there, and still goes on there.
Well,
It's not solved.
Howard Zinn, is a resource that I recommend and I always will. I've been teaching high school for on and off for about 30 years.
You're one of the good teachers, Alan.
Yeah, I am.
You are.
I am.
We know that.
I've got a mantra over at my desk, and I'm working on my self-esteem. And it says, Allison put it up in that calligraphy, really fancy writing. It says, "I am a good man." So I'm on a therapy track to.
I'll second
Anyway, Russell's an important, super important personage in the struggle, and taught a lot of us about what's really happening. The reason I mentioned Howard Zinn is because he wrote a book that was called People's History of the United States. That's Z-I-N-N, Howard Zinn. And I always carry that when I go into the classroom. I don't use textbooks. I mean, I don't, because they're. I remember one of the first textbooks I saw after the treaty was signed in '75 in Vietnam. No, in '75, '73.
Well, after Vietnam was liberated in '75, I think it's the right.
Paris Treaty.
And yeah. Anyway, it's important that the young people know what's happening, and so it's up to us, especially older people who have wisdom, because we've lived, we're still alive. I think it's important that we make serious effort to continue to teach the true history, including or maybe even highlighting the native struggle in this country, because it's a heroic struggle. In fact, I think the reason why the unemployment rate, for instance, in Pine Ridge, on the Pine Ridge Reservation, at Pine Ridge on the Pine Ridge Reservation, is so high, it's somewhere between 80 and 85% unemployment, is because it's payback. This is just my own personal view of it. It's payback for all the victories that the Lakota people fought the U.S. Army to a standstill, time and time and time again. And I think that they don't want to forget that.
I think another thing that people might like to do is get themselves a CD copy of Last of the Mohicans, the one in which Daniel Day-Lewis starred and Russell was Chingachgook, which is the and I mention that because when Russell told me he was making a movie, and he was doing Last of the Mohicans, I had to have some discussion with him about it, and he used to come by my house, which wasn't far from here when I lived in town here. He used to come home every weekend while he was filming it in North Carolina, I believe.
Yeah.
And he did all his own stunts, but he insisted on the set to make sure that Native people were properly portrayed. And one of the first things he came back, he was really angry at what they had tried to do. The producers wanted to put him in a dirty loincloth. And he told them in no uncertain terms that Russell could do that Indians didn't wear dirty loincloths. In fact, Indians taught Europeans how to bathe. I mean, Europeans hardly bathed. You take the English, the bathing was like once a year. And
I've heard that.
He was really offended
stinky.
and insisted that they be portrayed in the proper light in terms of who they really were and who they really are. And it's a beautifully done movie. And the very, very first, you don't notice this, I think, if you just look at the movie, but he pointed it out to me one day. The very, very first scene in the movie consists of Russell playing Chingachgook and Daniel Day-Lewis playing. What's his name?
Playing Daniel Day-Lewis.
Well, he was the white guy hero in that Last of the Mohicans, and Chingachgook's son. They're running through this forest, this wonderful ancient American forest that they still have, old growth forest. And he was running. They're running, and they finally come upon this deer that they have killed, and they finally run down. And there's the deer lying there, and the first words in the movie are a prayer to the spirit of the deer for giving its life so that they could live. And that is an important part of Russell Means' legacy, because
All life.
prayer was always the fundamental thing, and prayer and spirituality was a critical part of the occupation of Wounded Knee.
When you say prayer, we're talking about a kind of what I call anyway the red road. It's not associated. I mean, some people.
You mean it's not Christian?
No.
No, no, it's not Christian.
I'm a recovering Episcopalian.
It is.
And I'm here to tell you.
You know, I mean, in
I
terms
called
of
into the sweat lodge in Wounded Knee, and I in my head I said, "Where in the hell have you all been all my life?" I felt so at home.
I remember when I went to help out at Wounded Knee in July of 1973. The first thing that Russell Means had all of us white lawyers and support people do was we all had to sit down and read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which is an excellent book. And we had study sessions with Russell every night. We'd read 150, 200 pages, and we'd have study sessions every night. And the thing that struck me most of all is that we're reading Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, it kind of ends at a point where you think all the Indians are dead. And that was so far from the truth. But throughout all of it, we have this good representation of the spirituality of Native peoples. They are extremely spiritual, as are most indigenous people. They respect the earth and all that is upon it, and they revere it. I was struck by the fact that I understand from what I was told today that Russell was cremated, and that his ashes are going to be spread at Yellowstone, I think is what I heard.
No, Yellow Thunder Camp.
Yellow Thunder Camp.
Yep.
Oh, it's going to be at Yellow Thunder Camp.
It's in the Black Hills.
Which is a camp that Russell set up as a spiritual camp. And that in itself is a story because
that's a whole other story.
And I can do the spiritual part of it very quickly because he set it up as a spiritual camp. He tried to get what's called a special use permit from the U.S. Forest Service, and they denied it to him. We sued, they sued, we went to court, and the judge said, well, why, we said, why can't you get a special use permit? Why didn't you get a special use? We said, Judge, look, there are all these camps, all these special use permits throughout the Black Hills for Episcopalians and Pentecostals and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and all those people. And we said, well, when did they get them? They got them in the 30s. And he said, well, why didn't the Indian people get one in the 30s? And we told Judge O'Brien they were not allowed to practice their religion in the 30s. And he leaned over the bench in his strongest Irish Catholic voice and said, you better show me the proof of that. I don't believe it. And the next day he came back and said, it's okay. I checked it. And you're right. Indian people were not allowed to practice the Sundance in 1973 at Wounded Knee. That was a crime. That was a crime then. Now, it's probably still a crime now, for that matter, but no one's enforcing it. And the fact of the spirituality is something that Russell would want us to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah, it made so much, coming from a Christian, so-called Christian home. I think that's kind of a funny thing. It feels humorous to me. I mean, anyway, it was like I walked into another world that made sense, and where people. I came in at night. I didn't know anybody, and I met Russ. I think the next day, and it was like they just took me for my word. Here I come in with all kinds of equipment and supplies of various kinds, and I'll let your imagination run wherever you want with that. And they just said, you look tired. Why don't you go down and go to sleep in the teepee church down at where the missionaries, lived really well. In fact, if I can just make one quick aside, one of the missionaries' homes right nearby in the little tiny hamlet of Wounded Knee had a basement. It was a big basement. I mean, it was as big as the house. And there were shelves that were 6 feet deep all the way around the basement. And they were stocked to the top with commodity foods. They were hoarding commodity foods and then selling it to Indian people after it had been given to them by the food and whoever, the federal agency. And in another one, they found Nazi party American Nazi Party literature in one of the bedrooms. And it wasn't like in a box, it was like on top of the bureau drawers. So I'm just trying to give a kind of a context to what Russ already knew about and acted against. And
You have to understand that Russell, we think about Russell Means now as an elder, but Russell learned from the elders, and the elders were there and had always been trying to teach the messages. They had not disappeared. Frank Foolscrow, probably the principal chief, we would call him, was always talking the message of Indian sovereignty.
Wallace Black Elk?
But Wallace Black Elk, of course, was critically important in all the activity of a medicine, what we call a medicine man, a spiritual man. But there were other chiefs, traditional leaders of the Oglala Sioux, who had constantly been spreading the message. And through the course of Wounded Knee, that message was able to be taught to the people who were there at Wounded Knee. As you were being taught about Native American spirituality, Indian people were being taught by Chief Badcobb and other chiefs who had been living and arguing and pleading this message for years. So the message that was taught to the people at Wounded Knee was carried on by Russell, and is being carried on by other people like Diane, who was there and heard the message. And it's a powerful message, and it's a message that we all can learn from.
Yep. I think I should step away. You got the story down. No, you're good. You're good. I want to tell you one short story that I remember. It was
good. Short stories, good.
Very, very short. One of the firefights that we had that happened at Wounded Knee was started by the feds, and it went on for 27 hours. 27 hours. Because I've talked to Vietnam veterans. In fact, I'm looking at one right now, and most of the firefights that happened were like 5 to 30 seconds long and then hit and run. Anyway, Russ was needed at one of the bunkers on the Pine Ridge Road, and so I ran across. This is at night. I ran across the road and told him he needed to come with me up to this bunker. So he jumped in the car. And I don't know who said what first, but I put my hand on his shoulder and said something to him. He said, "Get your hand off me, honky." And I said, "I'll get my hand off you if you quit calling me a honky." So, there were bullet holes in the car. Okay, you have to appreciate the context.
Who named you honky killer? Who named you that?
Well, I tried to think of something that would get the attention of the feds. And
so you took them.
They thought at the end, when they were so-called processing us out, they thought that I was one of the principal leaders because I was white. How's that for clear thinking? But Russell and I we got past that, and we drove up in a hail of two bunkers, federal bunkers, shooting at us, and drove up to the other bunker, and he got out, and we laughed about it later.
I think Russell would want us to mention the fact that there were two warriors at Wounded Knee who were murdered by the government.
Frank Clearwater and Buddy Lamont. And
they were shot by the government by snipers, U.S. government snipers. One was a U.S. Marshal anti-sniper. U.S. Marshal anti-sniper. That's what he testified to at one of the trials. And I've always wanted to know what an anti-sniper was. And I finally figured out an anti-sniper is someone who is a sniper, but you don't want to reveal the fact that he's killing people, so you make him into an anti-sniper. Because there were no snipers inside Wounded Knee, so what were they talking about? But now Russell joins with Buddy Lamont and Frank Clearwater.
And there were more than that. Okay, and there were six people who went out in a group and disappeared when they were getting out of the area, and their graves were later found by Edgar Bearrunner, and he went and reported it to Wickledock, Wounded Knee Legal Defense Committee up in Rapid, and they sent a team down immediately, jumped in the car, came down, and they found the graves, but they had been dug up. And Edgar told me that the only thing he could figure is that one of the white ranchers who owned some of the land spotted him spotting that because they knew about it, and they moved the what was left of the bodies away. But in the next 2 years, in the next 2 years after Wounded Knee, 68 brothers and sisters died from various I think it's COINTELPRO, and COINTELPRO was used against the Black Panther Party. It was used against the Black Berets, the Brown Berets, to disrupt and contract kill key leaders like Fred Hampton and Pedro Bissonnet. Pedro Bissonnet was a nonviolent leader amongst the Lakota people, a young man. And
Non-violent? He was a professional boxer. He was the best
That's
boxer.
right. That's right. And he never carried a gun.
That's right.
Ever. And they knew it. The people who cut him down with double.
They were afraid of him.
Yeah, they were terrified of him. And they shot him at a roadblock.
He was really one of the heads of the Oglala Sioux Civil Rights Organization, and that's why he was targeted and murdered.
They shot him with both BIA cops shot him with double-aught buck. They killed him, and that's how. I think if we had not been a strong resistance, I think the paratroop that were rumored to be, they were going to drop into Wounded Knee at night. They took us seriously enough that they realized that they couldn't commit another massacre. They had to negotiate, figure out how to get out of this without another massacre, because there was a poll taken. I don't know, it was a Harris or one of those polls, national polls, 2 weeks into Wounded Knee, and the question was, do you support the Indians or the federal government at Wounded Knee? And it was the only time, I think, that Indian people ever came out ahead. It was 51 to 49.
I think it was more than that, actually.
Was it?
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a majority. I thought it was slimmer, but whatever. Anyway, it was one of those rare times.
Because it was on the news almost every night.
Yeah,
and,
it was on the news every night.
And it was an education, even if sometimes the message was, at least we didn't have Fox News to put out lies.
Russell and others went in front of cameras and talked to news people and continually explaining, what was happening from the perspective of Indian people, and it created a consciousness amongst some, not all, but some of the news people, and they began to realize, what kind of duplicity was going on. They were being lied to about, the Indians are assaulting the feds on their reservation. Excuse me? How the hell do you, that's just insane. It's like going to Vietnam and saying, well, they shot at us, they're the violent people. Well, you're standing on Vietnamese land. Who's doing what to whom here?
Well,
anyway, Russell drove that point home in all of its manifestations.
And those press conferences and those presentations by Russell and Dennis and other people were really important because it educated a lot of people who didn't know anything about the Indian struggle, and that's what resulted in a lot in terms of the National Lawyers Guild, sending lawyers to assist in the struggle at the very beginning.
And I applaud the National Lawyers Guild, man. They were great. They came in and just...
And it was because of that we had lots and lots of young lawyers who came there and assisted in those trials. And when it came down to, I saw someone report that there were 89 cases. There were 372 defendants at Wounded Knee. Most of them were local people. And in order to defend all those cases, the young lawyers of the National Lawyers Guild were not up to the challenge of dealing with those issues. And so we called upon the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, which is really the best professional bar association for criminal defense lawyers. And we had some of the finest criminal defense lawyers in this country that came out to defend people at Wounded Knee. And these lawyers were people like Albert Krieger.
Kunstler.
And Bill Kunstler was famous as an activist and a fantastic lawyer, a wonderful man. But we had people that you would not think would be there. But Albert Krieger was a perfect example of that, because Albert Krieger his clients included a little old man in Arizona by the name of Joe Bonanos. Now, Joe Bonanos was, the movie The Godfather was modeled on Joe Bonanos.
He was
and I have never
of being a criminal.
Albert Krieger was the most extraordinary criminal defense lawyer I've ever seen. He's still alive. And Albert is a wonderful, he was just awesome. There was one day, Albert was in a courtroom representing people who were not the leadership. He didn't represent Russell and Dennis in Minneapolis. He represented the little people. And he had he said he had some kind of stomach problem, and he had to eat peanuts. So he's cracking these peanut shells open in the courtroom. And he's eating peanuts, and there's no jury yet. These are pretrial motions. And the judge said it was okay because he had a stomach problem. I don't know why you'd have peanuts, but in any event. So he's doing this, and he got up to do his cross-examination, and he was cross-examining, and the prosecutor stood up and objected to something, and Albert turned around and said in a loud voice, "Who said that?" And the prosecutor was so intimidated by his very presence that he wouldn't admit to it. And the judge said, "Well, there's no one objecting now. Go ahead, Mr. Krieger." And continued on.
Krieger.
And those were the kinds of people that these things that Russell and Dennis and Vernon was tireless in going around the country. Vernon Bellecourt,
Yes,
who
he
has
was.
died recently, and went around the country. He had a wonderful gift for gab. Vernon Bellecourt had made his money as Mr. Wig in Denver. He sold wigs in Denver. He made a fortune with selling wigs in Denver. Before that, he had been in prison, got a 25-year sentence for burglary, and became the barber. And he told me this himself, he used to cut the barber's hair every week. And he would constantly be talking to the barber to the warden like barbers do. And he got out in 6 years or 7 years.
Vernon.
But these were the kind of people who put forward the message. And, in spite of everything, the message came through that they needed help, and people came to help them. People of all kinds of people came to help them. And it was a marvelous thing.
When we went to trial in Sioux Falls as a result of the tactical squad being called in by the judge to attack the people in the courtroom, including a robed Lutheran bishop with nightsticks.
6 bishops.
Oh, that's right. There were, the Lutherans.
6 Lutheran bishops. They were all Lutheran bishops.
When we went to trial, it was like dangerous just to be in Sioux Falls. It was like being in Mississippi in the 60s. In fact, that's what I called South Dakota's Mississippi North. But every morning before we went into the courtroom, Vernon, we met in a conference room beforehand, and he would bring his pipe, and we'd all smoke the pipe. And one day we didn't smoke the pipe, and things went really badly for us that day. So we only missed one day, and in the end,
It was the lawyers who were not particularly spiritual from California who said, "Look, if it's going to make our day go better, let's make sure we do a ceremony every morning, because this is everything we had won was lost all at once." And they said, "Wow, let's go back to doing that. Let's get here on time, people." And we did after that.
Yeah.
But there were many trials.
And many stories.
But Russell, the greatest injustice that ever happened to Russell is that in these trials that went on as a side trials, Allen's case, in which he was tried with Bobby Joe Tiger, Lois Tiger, John Kincannon, they made a showcase out of, they took Allen the activist, they took John Kincannon, the wounded knee worker, they took Bobby Joe and Lois Tiger, a mother and daughter, from Sioux Falls,
and mother,
who else was there? And Vernon Bellecourt, a leader, and they charged them with riot at a courthouse.
And Russell
and
separated.
We, through a long process and an amazing legal result, we were able to convince the judge that they could not get a fair trial anywhere in South Dakota, and they had to dismiss the charges. Now, Russell Means was more hated than any of those people, and Russell Means' trial came up after that. Now, Russell Means's charges should also have been dismissed, and the same judge heard the case, Judge Braithwaite, but he had been so shunned by the community in South Dakota, by the legal community, that, I mean, he went to the bar meeting that summer in South Dakota and no one would talk to him. His father had been president of the bar. He was a respected conservative judge. He did the right thing. And they so destroyed that judge that he refused to dismiss the charges on Russell Means, leading to Russell Means' only conviction, of which he was totally innocent. Now, ironically, 25 years later, one of the main antagonists of Indian people, Governor Janklow, pardoned Russell 30 years later. So Russell never had a conviction at the end of his days.
He had bullet
was
holes in his body.
But the fact is that you know they could not let Russell not be convicted. And it was just, you know, on the one hand. On the other hand, I have to say that in spite of the fact that South Dakota, the parts of South Dakota, the essence of South Dakota so epitomized the Mississippi of the North, there were still huge amounts of people who were sympathetic and helpful to the struggle of Indian people, who wanted to learn and who assisted us in every single way. Everywhere we went, we had people who were assisting us, and that's an important part, that in the face of injustice, just as in Mississippi, there were when you were there in Mississippi as a civil rights worker, there were people out there, and in Mississippi maybe not as much, who didn't come forward.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
Who were the majority of people who didn't come forward and say anything, but did not support the racism of the South. Likewise, the same thing happened in South Dakota. And Russell tried to reach those people and tried to talk to those people.
We went into schools and talked to high school students, you know. The principal said you can't come in, we went in anyway.
Russell made his friends that way too.
Yep.
And so this racist governor who ran a campaign against the American Indian movement to be elected governor and congressman of the state of South Dakota, and who lost his seat in Congress for driving drunk and killing someone.
Yeah.
Eventually, when he was governor, before he killed someone, pardoned Russell.
Peter Matheson wrote a book. What was it called?
In the Spirit of Crazy Horse.
In the Spirit of Crazy Horse. And when it came out, was published, Janklow had a goon squad. They went around to all the towns that had bookstores, and they didn't buy them. They just took them.
They seized
Took
them.
them off the shelf.
He filed a lawsuit and prevented the publication of the book, and the original copies of In the Spirit of Crazy Horse have become collector's items.
Yeah.
Because it was finally published some 5 years later, and they took some things out. I don't remember what they took out, but
Roger. Russell was been compared to Crazy Horse, and Crazy Horse is almost a mythological. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Is a friend of mine said, she asked me. She said, "Well, who do you think is like, one of the great leaders, native leaders from your perspective?" And it was just, it came to my mom, those two names came to mind, Crazy Horse and Russell. I had some deep differences with Russell on several issues, but I wanted to honor him, to do this show, and maybe we'll do another one, because I think he more than paid his dues and represented his people honorably for 40 years, his whole life. Are we over time? We're over time. Oh, we got 2 minutes. Okay. Anyway, we're nmindiamediashow.org. You can get us on vimeo.com and watch our past shows. And I think Sue would like me to make this announcement.
Well, before that, I think I'd like to just remind people that as I get older, I realize there are lots of people who are 10, 20, 40 years younger than I am who don't know any of this history. And so if you want to learn more, read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. That's sort of a basic primer. And then Russell Means's autobiography, Where White Men Fear to Tread,
And another book.
is wonderful. And Peter Matheson's book, In the Spirit of Crazy Horse.
And another one.
What other one?
Voices from Wounded Knee.
Well, Voices from Wounded Knee is impossible to find. It's
No?
impossible to find. But aside from that, the other one, and I don't mean to denigrate anyone by forgetting the name of the book, but Dennis Banks has written his own autobiography. And that also, and Dennis is still alive, lives in Santa Fe, and was one of the other major leaders of the struggle at Wounded Knee, and a founder of the American Indian Movement. And his book should be, look it up on Amazon, Dennis Banks, and you'll get the title of the book, and it's a marvelous, marvelous book.
And since you bring those names up, I want to honor Richard Erdos, Erdoes, who died a few years ago. Great man who helped Dennis with his book and helped various leaders. Lame Deer, he
He was a
co-wrote.
wonderful author.
Oh, he's great, and I really miss him, and I think about him often. So if you want to find out more about any of this information, call me at 304-3144, or just, Google Wounded Knee, 1890, Google Wounded Knee, 1973. Look up Richard Erdos or Russell Means. There's this.
Ojibwa Warrior. That's it, Dennis Banks, Ojibwa
Thank you.
Warrior. Thank you. How could I forget
Sue's
that?
right there.
And the fact is, I think that with those basic collection of books, if anyone wants to really understand this period in history, they should read those books, and they will get some understanding of it. And I think that's the best thing that we could think of in terms of Russell, is to carry on the education that is necessary for people
And
to
carry
understand.
on whatever we need to carry on with.
Exactly.
If there's
exactly.
another Wounded Knee. We almost had a Wounded Knee at a big mountain a few years after Wounded Knee.
Well, you have to understand that after Wounded Knee, Yellow Thunder Camp, the police came, and there was no confrontation, although people were prepared to stand their ground. We took it into the courts, and we struggled with it there. But of course, the government uses the courts to diffuse and take away from the struggle. So
Getting it in the courtroom does that.
and it takes away all the energy and pisses it away in the courtroom
And
instead
money
of
and
in terms of the struggle.
Yep.
And so I think it's important for people to recognize the activism and the issues, and to educate and learn, and that way we honor the positive parts of all of this struggle, both on behalf of Russell and all the people who have struggled.
So thank you all for watching tonight, and thank you, the crew and everybody here who's assembled. It's an honor to be amongst you. You're fabulous. And I'll just remind you, don't forget our sisters that were the ongoing mass murder investigation that nothing has come of it. And 11 sisters' bodies were found on the West Mesa. And call 3011 and tell them what you think of a 10-year investigation with no resolution whatsoever. I think it's egregious. I think it's outrageous. Anyway, the other announcement, we always do announcements.
Good.
The Autonomous Playhouse tomorrow, the Homeless Apocalypse Tour. God, I got to go to this.
Puppet show.
A puppet show on foreclosures, homelessness, and GMO foods. That's tomorrow, October 26th, 4 p.m. at the Peace Center, at the Peace and Justice Center, 202 Harvard Southeast. Oh yeah, I did that. I'll do it again.
You can say their names. Keep going.
Oh, okay. I'll keep going. Anyway, call Sue at 268-9557 for more information. And again, I want to thank this great crew that's always comes forward and tries to educate and develop, raise the consciousness in our community. Steve Mills, Mike Swick, Bob Bailey, Sue Skirman.
And whose birthday is it today?
Oh, Steve Mills.
Happy
That's right.
birthday, Steve! Yay! Happy birthday!
He's our sound man extraordinaire, man. He makes sound come out of nothing. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned, because we're down, but we sure as hell ain't out. Thank you, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.